From the Presidential Palace, Manila, Dateline Malacañang.
Good day. Radio Pilipinas World Service can also be heard on shortwave broadcast through the shortwave facilities of the United States Agency for Global Media or Voice of America on the following shortwave frequencies: 15.640 MHz, 17.750 MHz, and 21.720 MHz. I'm your host, Leo Magpayo, and this is Dateline Malacañang. Philippine President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. and Singapore Prime Minister Lawrence Wong met Wednesday in Singapore, reaffirming one of Southeast Asia's closest partnerships and laying out a broader agenda for cooperation, from trade and investment to artificial intelligence, health, and social development. The talks, held during President Marcos's working visit, highlighted both nations' intent to deepen economic ties and craft new bilateral agreements designed to deliver concrete benefits to Filipinos and Singaporeans alike. Malacañang says the two leaders zeroed in on expanding trade and investment flows, tapping emerging opportunities in AI, attracting more investors, and strengthening collaboration in health and social development. They also agreed to pursue additional agreements to further elevate relations between the two neighbors. The meeting comes as Singapore prepares to take over the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN chairship next year, following the Philippines' leadership of the regional bloc this year. Both leaders reaffirmed their commitment to ASEAN centrality and vowed to work together for a peaceful, stable, and prosperous Southeast Asia. The Philippines and Singapore have long enjoyed strong economic ties, with Singapore consistently among the country's top sources of foreign direct investment and one of its most important trading partners in the region.
Dateline Malacañang.
Philippine President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. on Wednesday met with Singapore-based investors and telecommunications executives to advance initiatives aimed at expanding access to quality healthcare and strengthening the Philippines' digital infrastructure. In separate meetings, President Marcos sat down with leaders of ABC Impact and the Temasek Trust ecosystem, alongside Ayala Group representatives, to explore strategic investments that would accelerate the growth of the country's healthcare sector. According to the Presidential Communications Office, or PCO, ABC Impact reaffirmed its support for AC Health's expansion following its investment that gives the Singapore Impact investor roughly a 16% minority stake. The partnership with Ayala aims to widen access to affordable, high-quality healthcare by speeding up the rollout of hospitals, multi-specialty clinics, retail pharmacies, and other services nationwide. The PCO says the expansion of AC Health's operations is expected to generate thousands of healthcare and retail jobs and help build a more integrated, resilient system that delivers better outcomes for Filipino patients. ABC Impact's investment marks its first direct entry into the Philippine healthcare sector, expanding its regional footprint. AC Health targets a network of at least 10 hospitals, 300 clinics, and 1,150 pharmacies by 2027. President Marcos also met with executives of Singaporean telecom giant Singtel to discuss expanding investments in the Philippines' digital infrastructure and supporting the country's fast-growing digital economy. Singtel reaffirmed its commitment to deepen its presence in the Philippines, building on its long-standing partnership with Globe Telecom and the growth of NCS Philippines, a joint venture with Globe's Yondu. The continued development of ST Telemedia Global Data Centers in Quezon City and Cavite is expected to bolster the country's digital backbone and strengthen its position as an emerging regional data hub. The PCO says Singtel's engagement reflects sustained confidence in the Philippine market, noting that expanded digital partnerships will boost connectivity, create high-value jobs, and support long-term economic growth.
Dateline Malacañang.
Malacañang on Wednesday stressed that Vice President Sara Duterte's statements about an alleged assassination plot against President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. should be treated as a serious national security concern, not a simple case of grave threats. Palace Press Officer Claire Castro rejected the defense panel's claim before the Senate Impeachment Court that Duterte was merely responding to questions during a November 2024 press briefing. In that virtual presser, Duterte said she had contracted someone to kill the president, First Lady Liza Araneta Marcos, and former Speaker Martin Romualdez if she were killed. Castro said the remarks cannot be dismissed as a routine criminal offense because they involved the country's head of state. She added that the statements were publicly broadcast, making it impossible to argue that those mentioned would not have learned about them. She called the defense's argument that the remarks did not amount to an assassination plot ridiculous, stressing that Duterte never denied making the statements and instead offered justifications, including alleged threats against her and the supposed mistreatment of her former chief of staff. Castro said Duterte's admission that she had already spoken with someone willing to carry out the killings showed a meeting of the minds, making the gravity of the situation clear.
Ang Vice Presidente ay naniniwala sa kanyang sarili na wala siyang ginawang pagbabanta sa buhay ng Pangulo, ng unang ginang at ni dating House Speaker. Kahit kitang-kita na sa buong mundo ang kanyang mga tinuran, ang kanyang galit at ang kanyang mga pag-amin na siya ay kumausap ng isang tao na handang pumatay. At ang kanilang agreement, inamin niya. Nagkaroon na ng meeting of the minds ang dalawang nagpapapatay at isang willing pumatay. Ano ang sasabihin na paulit-ulit na walang basihan? Since it was the Vice President who admitted in this video that she had already talked to a person who was willing to kill the President, the First Lady, and the House Speaker. Ano pa ba ang dapat napatunayan? Ang mga pag-amin na ganito, ayon sa rules of court, kapag may pag-amin at ginajustify lamang nila dahil mismo ang abogado niya ang nag-justify kung bakit niya nasabi ang ganong klaseng mga salita, unconventional, hindi normal na pagkilos at pananalita o pag-react, ang burden of evidence ay nagsishift sa tao na umamin na siya ay magpapapatay. Ang prosecution sa totoo lamang ay Hindi na dapat magbigay pa ng additional evidence dahil ang pag-amin na ito ay nanggaling mismo sa Vice Presidente. Dapat sila magpatunay ng justifiable reasons nila kung bakit nila ito, or rather, bakit niya ito ginawa at sinabi. Uulitin natin, hindi ito simpleng grave threats. Ito ay mayroong kaugnayan sa national security ng ating bansa.
It was Palace Press Officer Claire Castro.
Dateline Malacañang.
Malacañang says President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. is pushing for a balanced approach to soften the impact of rising oil prices as the government studies possible assistance for affected sectors. Palace Press Officer Claire Castro told reporters the president has ordered agencies to assess the situation amid continuing fuel price hikes that could trigger higher transport fares and increased costs of basic goods. Castro said the Department of Transportation is reviewing possible measures and aid packages for both transport workers and consumers, noting that any fare increase would likely push up prices of other commodities. The government is also evaluating transport groups' request to fully implement the previously suspended 1 peso provisional fare hike, alongside potential support programs to cushion the impact on drivers while protecting consumers. On proposals to suspend or remove fuel excise taxes, Castro said there's still no update from the Unified Package for Livelihoods, Industry, Food and Transport or Uplift Committee, the interagency body created under Executive Order 110 to study measures that could ease the burden of rising fuel prices.
Sa ngayon po ay nakausap natin mismo si Secretary Banoy at sila man po ay inaatasan na pag-aralan ang sitwasyon at kailangan na balansihin ang mga pangyayari dahil kapag tumaas ang presyo ng pamasahe, definitely tataas din ang mga presyo ng ibang mga produkto. So, ang nais ng Pangulo ay walang maiwan, kailangang matulungan ang lahat sa tamang pamamaraan at sa balansing pamamaraan. So, inaaral po ito ngayon, according to Secretary Banoy Lopez. Isinabay po rin natin ang tanong na ganyan dahil nga nakikita natin sa news at muli binanggit din po ni Secretary Banoy Lopez na kasabay po ito sa pag-aaralan sa ngayon para po tama ang ating pagbibigay ng ayuda sa ating mga kababayan sa transport sector para hindi sila maiwan pero tuloy pa rin ang pagtulong din natin sa mga kababayan natin na mga consumer.
As Palace Press Officer Claire Castro.
Dateline Malacañang.
Also on Wednesday, Malacañang said it remains optimistic that Congress will move quickly on President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr.'s priority measures, emphasizing that the proposed laws are meant to deliver immediate benefits to Filipinos. Palace Press Officer Claire Castro said the administration is confident lawmakers can still act on the remaining bills despite the upcoming budget season and the ongoing impeachment proceedings in the Senate. Castro reported that several measures under Proclamation number 1318, including the National Center for Geriatric Health Act, amendments to the Government Assistance to Students and Teachers in Private Education Act law, and the Assistance to Individuals in Crisis Situations Act are now pending in the Bicameral Conference Committee. Amendments to the Universal Access to Quality Tertiary Education Act also await further action. She said the Last Mile and Geographically Isolated and Disadvantaged and Conflict-Affected Schools Act has already been transmitted to Malacañang for the President's signature, while amendments to the Masustansyang Pagkain para sa Batang Pilipino Act have been sponsored in the Senate. The Anti-Political Dynasty Bill has passed third reading in the House and is under Senate interpellation, while the proposed Presidential Merit Scholarship Program is pending before the Senate Education Committee after clearing the House. President Marcos placed all 8 measures under the LADAC priority list to accelerate reforms in education, healthcare, social protection, and governance.
Yung National Center for Geriatric Health, pending pa po, pending bicameral conference committee deliberation. Number 2, amendments to Government Assistance to Students and Teachers in Private Education Act, pending bicameral conference committee deliberation. AICS, or Assistance to Individuals in Crisis Situations Act, again pending bicameral conference committee deliberation. Amendments to the Universal Access to Quality Tertiary Education Act for enrollment process. Last Mile and Geographically Isolated and Disadvantaged and Conflict-Affected Areas Schools Act. Enrolled copy sent to Malacañang June 25, 2026. Amendments to the Masustansyang Pagkain para sa Batang Pilipino Act, sponsored in the plenary last June 17, 2026. Anti-Political Dynasty Law. House of Representatives approved on third reading. Senate second reading, period of interpellations. Presidential Merit Scholarship Program. House of Representatives approved on third reading. Senate pending with the Committee on Higher Technical and Vocational Education. Yan po ang pinaka-update sa ngayon. Since yan po naman din ay priority bills ng Pangulo, ay umaasa po siya na ito ay mapapabilis. Kasi ito ay para talaga sa ating mga kababayan. So mas gusto niya po ito maipasa agad.
Palace Press Officer Claire Castro.
Dateline Malacañang.
Malacañang on Wednesday said President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. remains firmly focused on governance despite an improvement in his satisfaction ratings in the latest Social Weather Stations or SWS survey. Palace Press Officer Claire Castro said the president neither celebrates nor worries about survey numbers, stressing that his priority is delivering services to the public. She added that while surveys are reviewed, they mainly serve as a guide for cabinet members in identifying areas that need more attention. The June 20 to 29 SWS survey showed 38% of adult Filipinos satisfied with President Marcos's performance, up from 33% in March. Dissatisfaction dropped to 45% from 49%, while 17% were undecided.
Siguro every time na itatanong niyo sa akin ang survey, every time, ito lang ang sasagot ko sa inyo. Kaya uulit-ulitin ko na lang to. Tumaas, bumaba. Ang Pangulo ay hindi po apektado ng numero. Tumaas yan, bumaba yan. Ang focus ng Pangulo ay magtrabaho. Kung ano ang kailangan maipaabot sa ating mga kababayan, yun po ang gagawin ng ating Pangulo at ng administrasyon na ito. Sa susunod ulit, next month, next week, meron na namang survey. Uulitin ko lang po ang aking sagot. Tumaas, bumaba, ang Pangulo po ay hindi apektado ng numero. Tuloy-tuloy lang po ang pagtatrabaho, hindi bakasyon.
Palace Press Officer Claire Castro.
Dateline Malacañang.
Meanwhile, Malacañang said the government's priority remains the pursuit of justice as it studies the possible implications of recent developments involving the International Criminal Court or ICC. Palace Press Officer Claire Castro said the Department of Foreign Affairs or DFA is assessing the impact of the United States position on the ICC and will brief President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. before any official stance is taken. Castro stressed that even as the review continues, the administration remains committed to seeking justice for Filipinos allegedly killed during the previous administration's anti-drug campaign while ensuring due process for those facing accusations. She said the government cannot ignore efforts to pursue accountability for alleged victims, but will not preempt the president's decision on the matter. Asked about continued cooperation with the ICC, Castro said no decision has been made. She added that any move will be guided by the need to uphold justice for both victims and respondents. The palace is also studying the possible effects of the U.S. position on the ICC, including its impact on Philippine laws. Castro said Malacañang will wait for President Marcos's pronouncement on whether the Philippines will align with the U.S. stance or remain neutral. There is likewise no update yet on whether the Philippines will seek to rejoin the ICC as the issue remains under review.
Since meron po kasing pinupursu patungkol sa justice para sa atin din mga kababayan na di umano ay naging biktima ng karumal-dumal na pagpatay, hindi ito basta-basta mapapabayaan ng ating gobyerno. So, pero still, hindi po tayo mangunguna kung ano po ang magiging pronouncement ng Pangulo patungkol dito. Dahil ang buhay ng bawat tao, ang hustisya para sa atin ay mahalaga. So, kung ano man ang kahihinatnan ng kaso sa ICC, sa tingin ng Pangulo, ay hustisya ang maidudulot nito. Hindi lang sa di umanong biktima, kundi din sa mga masasabi nating respondents o defendants or accused. Ang sabi ko po, mahalaga ang hustisya, pero hintayin po natin kung anong pronouncement ng Pangulo patungkol dito.
Under review pa?
Under review.
That was Palace Press Officer Claire Castro.
Dateline Malacañang.
Malacañang on Wednesday announced that President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. has designated Presidential Advisor on Peace, Reconciliation, and Unity, Mel Sarmiento, as chair of the Government Peace Implementing Panel, or GPIP, for the Bangsamoro peace process. Palace Press Officer Claire Castro made the announcement Wednesday during a press briefing in Malacañang.
Naitalaga po bilang chairperson of Government Peace Implementing Panel for the Government of the Philippines Moro Islamic Liberation Front Peace Process, si Secretary Mel Senon S. Sarmiento.
GPIP Chair, Sarmiento will oversee the implementation of the 2014 Comprehensive Agreement on the Bangsamoro with the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, or MILF, the pact that ended decades of conflict in Mindanao and led to the creation of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, or BARM. Sarmiento's appointment fills a key post that the MILF had asked to be permanently occupied after it declared a temporary pause in formal engagements earlier this year, pending the naming of a full-fledged chair. The GPIP is the government's counterpart to the MILF implementing panel led by Mohagher Iqbal. Unlike the negotiating panels that crafted the peace deal, the implementing bodies ensure both sides fulfill remaining commitments, including normalization, decommissioning of combatants, transitional justice, reconciliation, and socio-economic programs. Sarmiento becomes the sixth government chair of the panel as both sides mark the 10th anniversary of the implementing bodies on July 21st. His designation also comes ahead of the first Bangsamoro parliamentary elections on September 14th, where voters will elect the inaugural 80-member parliament. The elected officials will take their oath on October 30th, formally ending BARM's transition period.
Dateline Malacañang.
In other news, a new Social Weather Stations or SWS survey commissioned by the Strat-based Institute shows 45% of Filipinos want the Armed Forces of the Philippines or AFP and the Philippine Coast Guard or PCG strengthened to better protect the country's maritime rights. The June 20 to 29 poll was conducted shortly after Defense Secretary Gilberto Chodoro Jr. pushed for raising defense spending to as much as 4% of gross domestic product or GDP to boost the country's capability amid Chinese aggression in the West Philippine Sea. Modernizing the AFP and PCG emerged as the top first-choice measure nationwide, with strong support across regions, 47% in Luzon, 46% in Metro Manila, 44% in the Visayas, and 39% in Mindanao. Reinforcing alliances ranked second, with 33% choosing deeper maritime cooperation and joint exercises with allies as their top priority, while 22% favored forging new defense and security agreements. When asked for their second choice, reinforcing alliances led with 39% nationwide. Strat-based President Victor Andres Manhit said, Filipinos understand that defending maritime rights requires credible capabilities and strong institutions, noting that military modernization and partnerships with like-minded nations are complementary pillars of national security. He added that Filipinos recognize the need to invest in defense while expanding cooperation with partners committed to peace, stability, and international law.
Dateline Malacañang.
Philippine Coast Guard or PCG Commodore J. Tariela criticized China's newest statement on the 2016 Arbitral Award, saying it was a direct act of coercion toward European states rather than a legitimate legal argument. Tariela, who serves as the PCG's West Philippine Sea spokesperson, said Beijing's message was essentially a warning for European nations to stop respecting international law or risk damaging ties with China. His remarks followed a press briefing by Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian, who cautioned the European Union and European countries after they reiterated support for the arbitral ruling on its 10th anniversary. Tariela said China's posture reflects what Indo-Pacific states describe as illegal, coercive, aggressive, and deceptive behavior, a pattern seen in Beijing's actions across disputed waters. He argued that China's response was not grounded in law but in intimidation, noting that states with strong legal positions cite the law, while those without resort to threats. He stressed that countries committed to international law do not ask others to abandon it, and reminded that international law does not expire, cannot be bent by pressure, and does not require China's permission to be followed. Tarriela also pointed out that China itself signed and ratified the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS, the treaty that established the arbitral tribunal. Under Article 296 and Annex 7, the 2016 ruling is final and binding on the parties. He said there's no such thing as an illegal award, only a decision China refuses to comply with. China earlier urged European partners to act cautiously, stop supporting the ruling, and avoid harming China-EU relations. Last Sunday, the Philippines and 14 other countries, including Australia, Canada, Germany, Japan, the United Kingdom, and the United States, issued a joint statement reaffirming that China's sweeping maritime claims in the South China Sea have no legal basis. The European Union separately called for full implementation of the ruling and for disputes to be resolved peacefully under international law.
Dateline Malacañang.
Qualified government workers may begin receiving their performance-based bonus, or PBB, for fiscal year 2024 as early as October, the Department of Budget and Management, or DBM, said Wednesday. DBM Assistant Secretary Gerald Yanda said agencies are expected to submit their performance reports within the month. Validating bodies, along with a technical working group created under Executive Order 61, will then have 60 days to review the documents. The final eligibility assessment, to be issued after validation, will guide agencies in preparing the list of employees entitled to the 2024 PBB. Yanda said results are expected by September or October, allowing the incentive to be granted anytime from October to December. He emphasized that the PBB is tied to agencies' achievement of performance targets, process improvements, responsible fund use, and citizen satisfaction. Funding for national government agencies, PBB, is already included in the 2026 General Appropriations Act, while local government units, or LGUs, and government-owned or controlled corporations, or GOCCs, will use their approved local funds and corporate budgets. To qualify, an agency must earn at least 70 points under the new scoring system. Those scoring below 4 in any eligibility criterion will be excluded. Yanda added that the government is reviewing the performance-based incentive system to make future cycles more streamlined and efficient.
Dateline Malacañang.
And finally, 2 Filipino seafarers injured in the July 8th drone attack on the MV Blue safely arrived in the Philippines on July 15th aboard Turkish Airlines flight TK084, landing at the Ninoy Aquino International Airport, or NAIA Terminal 3 in Pasay City. They were received by Department of Migrant Workers, or DMW Officer in Charge, Assistant Secretary Augusto San Diego III, along with personnel from the Overseas Workers Welfare Administration, or OWA, the Manila International Airport Authority, or MIA Medical Team, the Bureau of Immigration, and the new NAIA Infrastructure Corporation. The DMW and OWA provided financial assistance before turning the seafarers over to their licensed manning agency, which was instructed to ensure continued medical treatment and psychosocial support as they recover. The DMW reported that 3 other Filipino crew members who suffered burn injuries had earlier been evacuated and are now receiving treatment at an onshore medical facilities. The Cameroon flag tanker carrying 18 Filipino crew reportedly came under an apparent drone attack while transiting the Black Sea, damaging its stern, propeller, and engine room and triggering a fire that was later extinguished. All crew members were accounted for after the incident.
Dateline Malacañang.
Before we conclude our program, Radyo Pilipinas World Service of the Presidential Broadcast Service can be heard over the following shortwave frequencies: 15.640 MHz, 17.750 MHz, and 21.720 MHz. Radyo Pilipinas World Service is also live on audio streaming. Just download Evox PBS Receiver on your Google Play Store or the App Store from your Apple phone. You can also visit our Facebook page and YouTube channel. Just type in and search for Radyo Pilipinas World Service. Kindly subscribe, like, and share our posts as well. And that concludes this edition of Dateline Malacañang. For Radyo Pilipinas World Service, this is Leo Magpayo. Good day and stay safe.
From the Presidential Palace, Manila, Dateline Malacañang.